Well, I want to thank those of you joining us. My name is Dr. Michael Fernandez. I'm a physical therapist with Kinetic Physical Therapy, and I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Lou Bevilacqua. Dr. Bevilacqua is the founder of Sanare Today, and he's been a practicing clinician since 1989. And Dr. Lou, do you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself briefly?
Sure. So as you said, I do a company called Sanare Today. We provide intensive outpatient programming. We have several locations. I'm also a practicing psychologist. Individually, I see people in my office in Westchester. It's my private practice. Also a dad of 3 daughters. My oldest is actually expecting in a couple of weeks.
So today, what we wanted to talk about as far as the topic of discussion is, obviously there's a lot been going on over the last several months with the pandemic, the coronavirus, and certainly we've seen it from the physical therapy world, but we wanted the opportunity to maybe hear from you in your world and share with some of our patients and some of the people that we're familiar with, what changes you've seen as far as the mental health world goes. Have you seen increases in anxiety and depression in some of these things as a result, or maybe even exacerbated by the coronavirus pandemic?
Absolutely. So there was definitely an increase in the amount of stress and anxiety that all of us have felt. And I think one of the silver linings, if you will, through this whole pandemic is that we're not feeling as isolated in the sense of I'm the only one who feels anxiety and stress. This has affected the entire world. So when you're talking about feeling anxious, feeling stressed, you're in good company because all of us are kind of experiencing this together. So there's definitely been an increase in the amount of anxiety and stress that we've been seeing in terms of the people that have been joining us and working with us at Sanare. And also, as a consequence of that is depression. Anxiety and depression tend to go very hand in hand. Usually one will precipitate the other, but in this case, I think, in the beginning, everybody was very anxious and worried about, what does this mean? How is this going to affect my family? What does this mean for my future in terms of being able to work, et cetera? And then it became more of a depression in the sense of how long is this going to go on? It's really isolating. It's very hard to get motivated. We've seen a lot more of people having difficulties with sleeping, staying kind of on task with their eating. So we've seen a lot of changes over the last few years.
Yeah, we recommend. I'm personally someone who struggles with anxiety and particularly sleeping, and I've had some strategies that have worked well for me as far as even during downtime setting regular wake schedules, and even I journal before I go to bed just to get some of those thoughts out. Do you have any recommendations for people struggling with anxiety, in particular as it relates to sleep? Because we know that sleep, obviously, from my world in the physical therapy world, is incredibly important too. That's when your body actually gets the opportunity to recover, just like your mood and your wellness and your depression, your anxiety is benefited. So what kind of other thoughts or strategies might you have for people?
Well, first of all, you're exactly right. I think it's kind of a cornerstone to mental health. I often talk about nutrition, pillars to good sound mental health. When you talked about having a regular bedtime, regular wake time, that routine helps us. It helps us to kind of create somewhat of a predictability. It also helps us in the ability to have a set downtime, and our body actually gets accustomed to that and starts looking forward to that, starts preparing itself. There's a kind of a memory, if you will, to that. But in terms of preparing ourselves, I think it's important maybe to journal. Sometimes it's helpful to journal about something that's going well, maybe a gratitude journal, things that were happening that day. If they were kind of tumultuous or stressful, sometimes the journaling may heighten that anxiety. So one of the things that I would encourage is to kind of start to focus the mindset to shift a little bit to focusing on what went well that day if you're trying to fall asleep. Also, different strategies such as stretching, maybe some yoga before bed, having some downtime from any screens is also very helpful. No big discussions with anybody before going to bed.
Maybe avoid watching the news before bed,
Definitely
right?
avoid news. And then being able to maybe even read or do puzzles or some games with family. Now, one of the silver linings to this whole shelter in place is that we've been playing a lot more games at home, a lot more family time.
Yeah. And as far as one of the things that I think that you touched on actually on a Facebook Live that you did yesterday that I dropped in on was this idea of, and I'd love for you to expand on it because I thought it was a really interesting point because I know I'm guilty of this myself, is this idea that we're stressed and we're anxious because of all the unknowns. And a lot of us are in this mindset that we're waiting until things return to normal before we're in this mindset that when things return to normal, I'll be okay. And that we're basically waiting for that to happen before we learn to be comfortable with just the situation right now.
I think that's a very common perception and hope that all of us who struggle with depression or anxiety, that if things could just change, I would feel better. And so we're almost waiting for life circumstances or this pandemic to end, or things that are typically outside of our control to end, and then we're going to be okay. The reality is we're in charge of being okay. It's more the response that we have to what life presents that determines whether we're okay or not okay. And so it's really important that if you're struggling with anxiety or depression or any kind of mood instability, if you will, to focus on what you have control over. Because oftentimes anxiety is fueled by that uncertainty. It's fueled by questions of what if this, what if that. And so that kind of swirls in your head and it's easy to kind of go down the drain with it. So it's important to start identifying, well, what are the answers to some of those questions? What will I do in order to feel better or to feel a little bit more grounded or feel a little bit more motivated? Depending on what it is you want to do, instead of feeling anxious, will help you decide, well, what's my plan?
Yeah. So do you have, for someone who's maybe struggling with those thoughts and how to kind of get there, do you have strategies that they could use at home in order to try and navigate those thoughts and piece that together?
Yeah, well, it's interesting that I focus a lot on people's thinking, and we typically don't think of our thoughts, right? Like we just kind of go through life and we're not tuning in to what we're thinking and saying to ourselves. But that's really a key to changing mood, because the way we think as well as what we do, our behavior, directly impact how we feel. So if you want to change an emotion, one of the first things you have to do is start to tune in to what's the dialogue in your head. But again, that's hard to do. So it's important to actually be intentional about that. Plan it. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, before bed, any time of day, notice what's going on. What am I thinking about? What am I focusing on? Now, it's important to also note that it's not just our thoughts, it's the experience that we're having in our head. We can have pictures and images of things that are going on that also contribute to feeling anxious or feeling depressed. So it's not just how we might be thinking about something, or perceiving or interpreting it, but it's also the experience that we're having in our head that we need to tune into.
Okay. Is that, can you touch, is that kind of where you go with the cognitive behavioral therapy?
Absolutely.
Is, you know, I've done a little bit of cognitive behavioral therapy myself in identifying those thoughts and maybe identifying some of those repetitive thoughts that you have. Yeah. Those, you know, should statements where I should have done this or this should happen. And that's kind of the first step of identifying how to change those thoughts. Is that where you go with the cognitive behavioral therapy?
Yeah. So one of the things to recognize is in order for change to occur, you have to be aware of changing, right? And so without that awareness, it's very difficult to just snap your fingers or wake up tomorrow and be different. So this requires us to be intentional and plan to do things. So when we're looking at changing the way we perceive things or think about things, we have to, like I said, take the time to notice. And journaling is one of those ways. We can write down what it is that we're worried about. What are some of those anxious thoughts that we have? What could we think instead? If I want to be calm, what thoughts do I need to support a feeling of being calm? What would I be telling a friend? That's another strategy. You know, it's often easier to tell you how to feel anxious or calm down from being anxious than for me to tell myself, right? But if I can think about what would I say to a friend and write it down in my journal, it flows a little easier.
Yeah. I'm pretty good telling everyone else how to get rid of their anxiety, but
Absolutely.
it's always a little bit, like you said, it's a little bit harder to tell yourself that. But that's where, from my own personal experiences, I know that the journaling has been really helpful, because sometimes you don't even realize what the thoughts are until you actually read them almost aloud to yourself, that you're having some of these thoughts. And so that's, from my perspective, something that I found very beneficial. So one of the things that you and I had talked about before is a lot of these worrying about these thoughts and these worries about what's going to happen as we return to normal. It's quote unquote normal, right? Yeah, what is normal, and what is that going to look like, and what does that entail, and how people are starting to step outside their homes and their comfort zone and maybe go to businesses, and how do we navigate that fear? How do we navigate that fear, or how do we start that for somebody who's maybe never, especially for somebody who's maybe never experienced anxiety before, and what that feels like?
Well, it definitely doesn't feel good, right? And it's something, again, that we're all struggling with. So keep that in mind. That's somewhat comforting. Doesn't change anything about you. You're still feeling anxious, but it is somewhat comforting to know that I'm not alone. And that's a key piece to why we want to get out, right? It's to not be isolated. If we can get out, being in person with somebody creates a very different feel than through a phone conversation or a Zoom chat or something like that. We can do that. It's one of the ways to connect. It's one of the options, right? And that's really thankful for technology. But at the same time, being in the same room provides a lot more benefits, from a sense of support, understanding, connection. And that's really important, because we as humans crave that. We crave acceptance. We crave being in contact with one another. When we do that, though, it's important to be smart about it, right? We need to follow the guidelines. If you're in public, wearing your mask or washing your hands, not touching your face, it's the things that we should be doing all the time anyway, not just in a pandemic, but it's stuff that we can do to keep ourselves safe and reduce some of that anxiety. Now, you're going to have that worry, what if? What if I get sick? If I go out, I'm going to get sick. There's a chance, right? There's always a chance. There's a chance that we can just be, in bed all day too. And I don't know, is that better? It's a tough choice, but I think, to me, getting out, getting back to living life and thriving is really important. And that's one of the things that's really important to us at Sanare, is to help people thrive. It's not just about getting back to baseline. It's about thriving. And even during a pandemic, you can thrive. You can get out and really enjoy life, but it takes mindset, right? You have to shift the way you're thinking about things and activities, and we have to adapt.
Yeah. And what would you say to the person who maybe feels like they could use some help? Mm-hmm. Again, I think for a long time I was hesitant to even be open about some of my struggles with depression and anxiety in the past, because either feelings of there being a stigma to it, not knowing if your friends or family would understand what you're feeling, maybe not even understanding what you were feeling yourself, and then maybe even being fearful of taking that step to admit out loud to a stranger or someone else like yourself who maybe can help you. What would you say to somebody who maybe continues to struggle with the anxiety, continues to struggle with some of these stressors, once they start getting back to a quote unquote new normal of life, what recommendation would you give to that person who's maybe hesitant to seek help for no other reason than maybe they're concerned about those stigmas or those personal fears?
Well, stigmas are there. And the key thing is looking at, what do I need? If your goal is to thrive, to feel better, how am I going to do that? If I hold all of that inside, that probably hasn't been working too well. So one thing, as we said early on, this pandemic has created anxiety for the majority of us, if not all of us. At some point, we've all experienced some form of anxiety and stress. And as a result, some down days. Might be a little different than being depressed, but there's a feeling that there's a universality here, that everybody is in the same boat. So reaching out is really key to breaking that. The other thing is, because nowadays we're doing so much telehealth, it's much easier to reach out. I mean, you could make a phone call and do the session over the phone. Like, things are so much easier now than having to get in your car, find the place. I don't know if I'm going to get a parking spot. I don't know if I'm going to find the office. What about if I'm in a waiting room and I see other people? Like, all of those worries and fears can be subsided in some ways, because we'll divert all of that to telehealth.
Yeah.
Now, eventually, hopefully, we'll get back into the offices. In some of my offices, actually, we are doing that. So we're doing both. But most therapists nowadays are giving you the option. And so telehealth is one of those options. And I think I would take advantage of that.
Right. And so you have offices, multiple offices, right? So you have obviously one here in Chester Springs, right? Actually in the same building that we're in Kinetic. So we're very familiar with you guys, but what other offices, what other locations do you have?
Well, so we have Westchester, Havertown, Center City, Kennett Square, King of Prussia, North Wales, and Trout. I think I got all of them. We have 8. But again, if you don't want to go in the office, you can call and we do telehealth. But if you also want to go in the office, in fact, we are seeing a trend right now. About 60% of the intakes that we got last week were requesting to come into the office.
Yeah.
So we're kind of seeing that change.
Yeah. And I can say, from my personal experience, that I think that one of the hardest parts for anybody who may be considering seeking help is taking that first step in making the call and just setting up the appointment.
Yeah.
And I can say that, from my personal experience, that was always the hardest part for me, was picking up the phone and making the call. After that, it's relatively easy, as long as you find someone who you're comfortable with.
Yeah.
And obviously you have multiple therapists and multiple people, so I'm sure you have plenty of experience with making sure that people find someone they're comfortable with.
Yeah, just to comment on that. So research demonstrates or tells us that within 4 sessions, 4 meetings, you typically can tell whether you've connected or not. If you haven't within 4 sessions, you probably aren't. So that's a good rule of thumb. Second thing is to know, what is it that you're looking for in a therapist? Like, how do you want that person to be? How do you want them to present? Is it a male? Is it a female? Is it somebody young, somebody older, somebody middle-aged? Is it somebody who has experience in a particular kind of therapy? You can go on Psychology Today and kind of type in all of those parameters and find individuals who kind of meet that criteria. You can also call us at Sanare Today, and we will help guide you through that process, and we will get you into giving you some ideas of who might be beneficial to work with, because we're a resource to a lot of the people in all of our communities too. So it's not just about coming into our doors and providing services through Sanare, but it's also helping you thrive however we can do that.
Great. Dr. Liu, I appreciate you joining us. It's been a pleasure talking with you. And again, I want to let everybody know that this video will be on our YouTube page, Kinetic TV on YouTube. So it will be available to watch there. So if you think anyone else, friends, family might benefit from it, please share that with them. And certainly if anybody needs their services, you can visit SanareToday.com, and you can view Dr. Liu's bio, and you can also check out the other locations if you or someone you know is struggling right now. now to manage these things. So Dr. Liu, thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks
All
for
right.
having me.
Take
Great.
care, everybody.
Take care.
Bye.